Hey, and Happy New Year. I know that usually on this channel, what I am posting is me making music or music videos or stuff related to my own projects. But given that we are here at the end of 2024, I thought this is a great chance for me to go over some of my favorite albums that came out this year. So these are my top 10 favorite albums of 2024 that we're going to run through, and I'm going to run through them actually just in reverse order. So from my number 10 to my number 1 slot. If you want to read the full essay on this, that actually goes in the opposite order. It goes from my number 1 all the way to my number 10. That's published on my Patreon and has all of my unedited opinions on these albums. But I'm going to go through my top 10 favorite albums that came out in 2024. And to be really clear, these are not necessarily the best albums that came out in 2024. These are my top 10 favorites. These are the albums that touched me in some way, that had like some narrative or lyrical depth and that made me feel something deeply or something that I hadn't felt before. Maybe they had sounds that inspired me, or it was just maybe a piece of art that I thought was fun. So if you disagree with these picks, then good. You should, because you're not me. However, I hope that you'll give each of these albums a listen or a chance, and that maybe my perspective could provide you with a unique way to listen to them. So without any more stalling, these are my top 10 albums of 2024. So in my number 10 slot is the album Foxing by Foxing. This is Foxing's first album under their new independent label, if I'm being correct, and it is a self-titled album very late in the game, which I think is kind of a cool move. And my favorite thing, I'll tell you what, my favorite thing about listening to Foxing is that I always can expect to hear something unexpected or something that I've absolutely never heard before. In fact, to the point that usually I have to give it multiple listens just to get my ears used to hearing these new kinds of sounds. And I'll tell you what, this album does not disappoint in having that weird, unique, just it is Foxing. I don't even know what you actually describe it genre-wise. This is a Foxing album. The album flows front to back wonderfully, and it really does demand a listen. But my only complaint really with it is that there's not a lot of standout tracks in this. With their last album, Draw Down the Moon, which is one of my all-time favorites of theirs, I felt like the album flowed really well, and there were these tracks that really stood out to you that you're like, oh, I really love that song, and I remember that track. And with this one, it was a little hard to remember some of the individual tracks, but I felt like the album as a whole had this really, really good through line to it. It was weird. It was interesting. It's grown on me with every listen. I think if you want to challenge your taste, I would highly recommend that you give Foxing by Foxing a spin. And my favorite tracks from this album, number 1 easily is this song called Spit. Has this crazy growly low end that just picked up my ears the first time I listened to it. And then my other 2 favorites on this one are going to be Secret History and Hall of Frozen Heads, which is just a killer track name. My number 9 slot, we have Clancy by 21 Pilots, which I honestly didn't expect to make my top 10. But as I've been listening to this more and more this year, this album has started to really, really grow on me. I would say the biggest issue that I had with this was that when Overcompensate, which was the first track of the album and the first single that they released, when that song came out, it really made my ears tingle. Sorry for my word choice, but that's the best way that I can describe it. And I was really excited for what this album was going to look like based off of that single. And then when the full album came out, I was initially kind of disappointed. I felt like there was promised this really, really deep and in-depth concept album, and what was released was just a little bit different than that. And so I had all of these expectations, not even for quality, but just for what I was going to get out of this album. And then when the album actually came out, it was a little bit different than what I expected. So I kind of listened to it a bit when it first dropped, and then it went on rest for a while. But as I've been listening to it more and more this year, I really found myself enjoying this album. It felt kind of mature, like it had grown from some previous 21 Pilots titles to provide this more grown-up approach to their tongue-in-cheek style of songwriting, and even like a more mature approach to some of these like really emotional tracks that are on there. And the more that I listened to it, the more that I liked it. So I think if you gave up on Clancy too soon this year, like I did, I'd highly recommend that you give it a few more like intentional listens. Let the expectations go, and like giving this the listen that it deserves really gave me a much better experience, to the point that there's a lot of songs on this that I really, really love now. And I think that it also goes to say that you shouldn't compare this album to other 21 Pilots albums. Like, let this be its own thing. Don't compare it to something else, and just give it a listen as something on its own. And it's really a solid piece of art that has very slowly like worked its way into my brain this year. And some of the songs have really had an emotional impact as well, which is really what I look for a lot in an album. My favorite tracks off of this one are, number one, Overcompensate. Such a killer start to this album. I love the way that synth line comes in, and I love when the drums switch up. It's a really, really sick opening. Navigating is awesome. Has that like Paul Meany production vibe on it. Like, you can really tell that he worked on this album. And then Next Semester has very, very quickly over the last few months become in my top 3 favorite songs off of this record. In the number 8 place, and I don't have this album on vinyl, is the album Self-Hell by While She Sleeps. This is actually the first While She Sleeps album that I ever listened to, and here's what I'm going to say about it. This album did not tug at my heartstrings. It did not show me the depths of what poetry can look like in music, but it's just like fucking awesome. The first time that I heard the guitar part opening on the track To the Flowers, I nearly gave up playing guitar. I was just like, I'm never going to be this good. This is so, so cool. Or it's like, and then whatever he's doing with his pedal setup on that track, it's like guitar playing for people who drive manuals. Like, it was just a really, really sweet and creative part. And the whole rest of this album has these really interesting blends of metal and like electronic influences, which actually seems to be a trend in my picks for music this year. And then the breakdowns are just epic. And being honest, on first listen, I didn't love this album, but it really grew on me rapidly with just how fun this was to listen to. Like, I can't keep myself from making, like this kind of face every time that there's that like heavy guitar beat down on this album. And it's been really great listening to on road trips. I can't tell you how many times my wife and I have gone on a long road trip and have just like headbanged to this album the whole time. So it's a really like sick, fun, it's just a cool metal album, man. My favorite tracks from it are Rainbows. Has a super, super sick guitar solo in the latter half of the song. And then To the Flowers has a really sweet guitar part building into it. I just love the dynamics on that one. And then Enemy Mentality, I just like the drum parts really stood out to me, and I really loved that track. In number 7, we're looking at a very different album genre-wise, and that album is Another Year by Brother Bird. I have been so fascinated and haunted, truly, by Caroline Glazer's or Brother Bird's voice since I first listened to the song Leave It Alone off of her first EP. And I feel like in each of her songs, like she's holding a bird in her hand, like that's kind of how I would describe the song feeling. It doesn't grip tight enough that it risks hurting the bird, but it's just tight enough that the bird can't escape. It like emotionally holds you in this perfect little balance. And there's always these like really big reverberating vocals that are just kind of like this haunting cloud of music. And what I felt like this album was it just felt like I was sitting in a cabin in the winter while like snowed in and there's a fireplace going. It's just absolutely a record that's worth experiencing. And really the reason that this record doesn't go higher on my chain for this year is that while I think it's really fantastic, I didn't love it as much as her last album, Gardens, and also kind of failed to find like a particularly hard-hitting individual track on this one. But that aside, like Glazer is a master storyteller, and any chance to sit down and listen to her take me on a narrative ride is 100% worth it. I mean, the songwriting is amazing. The harmony are perfect. every time. And this whole album just feels like a cozy night by the fireplace. And that was something that, especially for a chunk of this year, was really what I was looking for. And I loved just putting this album down, sitting down with a cup of coffee and just like relaxing and listening to it and just turning off for a little bit. So this is absolutely worth a listen in my number 7 slot. And my two favorite tracks from this album are Quitter and Ghost, which both just capture that unique thing that she does so well. And I'm not doing a great job of describing it, so you should probably go listen to this album for yourself, and then I guarantee you will understand it. In my number 6 slot, and dramatically changing genre once again, is CARNAL by Nothing More. Going pretty heavy with this one. I've been following Nothing More since their sophomore album, and I've always been like a really big fan of their tendency to kind of steer towards these like existentialist philosophy themes, these like massive drums and like almost like pop level soaring choruses. But as someone who really enjoyed their last album, Spirits, when this one came out, I had pretty high expectations, and this album did a decent job of meeting them. What I really liked about this album is that every listen it got better. I think sometimes you have that first listen and it like hits you and everything's new, and then once everything's not new, you're kind of over it. And this one was like every time I listened to it, it just got better. There was more things that I was able to pick out in it. And there were a lot of features on this album that were really surprising. You had Eric from I Prevail, and you had David Draymond from Disturbed. But honestly, my favorite songs from this record were the ones that were just the normal band, not these ones that had some big names that I think were probably selling points for this album for a few people. Once again, you've got some electronic influences. You have these like synthesized arpeggios and some glitchy breakdowns, especially in the final song on this album. And I really enjoyed those, but I also found like the narrative through line thought-provoking, which has always been something that I've looked for in I Prevail albums. And plus, like Johnny Hawkins' vocals just make me feel like I'm standing on top of a mountain, like covered in mist. I mean, Nothing More is able to capture that like romantic poetry idea of the sublime, and they do that again really well with this album. So if you want just like a good kind of like epic rock album that you can just rely on being what it is, and also you want some of that like emotional and narrative depth, CARNAL by Nothing More does it. This was a frequent listen for me this year, especially like around the late summer, and has easily earned that number 6 slot in what I think are the top 10 albums this year. All right, so number 5 might have some dispute, but in my number 5 slot is Posthuman Next Gen by Bring Me the Horizon. And I did really not expect for Bring Me the Horizon to make my top 5 this year, but you know, here we are. And I've seen like a lot of mixed reviews about this album in particular. I've seen some people who really love it. I've seen some people who absolutely hate it. I've also seen people who, I guess it's cool now to dislike Bring Me the Horizon, but I don't really care what other people think of this one. I really love this album, and I think maybe part of it was that I went into it without any like preconceived notions of what it could be. Ever since Ammo, which I also really liked, that might be one of my favorite Bring Me the Horizon albums, even though it's so different from everything else they did, but I think it was like showing their range that was really cool for me. But ever since then, I've pretty much approached their releases with the assumption that it's going to be different from whatever they did before. And I think that's really exciting, especially in our current like era of music. But here's why I think this gets my top 5 slot. And it kind of relates to what else I was into this year, which is that a big emotional impact that was made on me this year was I, for the first time, played the game Cyberpunk 2077. And that left a pretty hefty emotional impact on me. And I think part of why I fell for this album was because it almost like filled the hole that Cyberpunk left. In fact, if I had to like describe the genre of this album, I would describe it as like cyberpunk metal. I mean, the sounds on this album are so incredibly fun. It's a little bit ADHD music, but like there's all of these different genre influences and like distorted guitar breakdowns and these like surprising moments where like the lyrics actually made me have a pretty hefty emotional reaction, especially like the song Strangers hit me really hard. And I really loved that one. There's songs on this that you can dance to. There are songs you can scream to. There are songs you can just hang out to. And it's just a really like solid, fun, like it covers all the bases. You've got the emotion, you've got the breakdown, you've got the interesting sounds. It's such a really neat and exciting and different album, and it's produced fantastically. My biggest issue with it is this thing where they capitalize and don't capitalize letters. Like the titles of these songs are ridiculous. I really enjoy the songs, but it's like I'm embarrassed to tell someone the song name because I can't even spell it. It's like I don't need to feel like a serial killer to spell your album. It might go in with their like lore or brand thing for this specific record, but for me, I'm just like, dude, just use the normal titles. I mean, we don't need to capitalize and uncapitalize everything. So this album has really earned a fair share of repeats from me this year, and I think it's really fun. It's just got so many unique little sounds and moments to make your ears perk up, and is totally worth a listen or a few listens. My favorite tracks from this are A Bullet With My Name On It, which features Under Oath, and I think what's really funny about that song is when you listen to it, if you're familiar with like older Under Oath back in the like a Boy Brushed Red era, what you get is like there's this moment exactly in the song where you can tell that like Under Oath is doing the writing. Like the production suddenly sounds different, and you're like, oh yeah, that is Under Oath, which is really, it was kind of like a sweet collaboration that I wasn't expecting. The other one, like I said, I really loved Strangers. It feels like it could be in the soundtrack for Cyberpunk, and it's just got like that nice balance between interesting sounds and emotional depth. And then R.I.P. is just fun. It's really fun to listen to. So, yeah, those are my top 3 favorites from this album. And now let's move on to my number 4, which is radically different from that album, and that is Sable by Bon Iver. Once again, another big pivot here. And I think it's an important one at that because this is a 4-track EP and it's taking my number 4 slot on my favorite albums of 2024. And there's like a lot of specifics that I could give you about this EP, but it is Bon Iver. You know what kind of instrumentation we can expect. But here's what I'm going to say about it. So yes, it's only 4 tracks and it's making this list of albums for me. But this album feels like, and I think this is the best way I can describe it, this album feels like it's distilled. If we're to approach this with almost a brewer's metaphor, which I also learned how to brew my own beer this year, so I guess these two things connect. You can ferment mash to make beer. It's this 3 or 4 week fermentation process. Or you can distill it and then you make whiskey, or you make, a spirit. And the longer and more expertly that you distill, like the more part of this process, you get something that's more and more pure and perfect. Sable feels like it's distilled, There's a few of these albums that I'm going to describe as raw, and this just feels like purified. This is the purest essence of what it is trying to be. I feel like you could add tracks, you could take tracks away, but if you did that, it wouldn't be this like perfect little vignette of an album. So this makes my top 4 because when I listened to it, I was just like, it's perfect. It like hits all the things that I want. It's not extra. It's not too little. It's just like completely distilled emotion, and I really, really loved that. My favorite tracks off of this one are Things Behind Things Behind Things and Awards Season, which, the like saxophone trumpet part at the end of Awards Season is so good. So I highly, highly recommend this 4-track EP. All right. Pivoting genre once again is Fission by Dead Poet Society. Dead Poet Society was a band that I had never heard of until this year, and I actually was shown the track Bury Me Whole off of their last album, which looks like this, but is titled, I think it's called Aggressive. I don't know. That's what I've heard. That might be the case. obviously there's no words in the title. And I was super quickly hooked on their like little blend of blues and rock, and like it was just a new and exciting sound for me. And coming out in January of 2024, Fission was just this like turning point of what you can do with rock music. I don't even really know what to call this genre, but it was just so damn fun to listen to, you know? Like, you've got Jack Underkoffler's vocals, these gritty bass lines, you know, soaring like pop-esque choruses, blues-influenced guitar riffs. I mean, it just makes this album like one to listen to time and time again and enjoy more and more every time, to the point that I think this album probably defined my summer. And I'm really glad that it did. I mean, these tracks, in honesty, they didn't poke my tear ducts necessarily, but they did often make me just like want to scream them. I mean, some of them like as fight songs, some of them just inviting you to like participate in a really, really killer and standard melody. And then from a music and production standpoint, I'm obsessed with this album. I mean, the balance between every instrument is perfect. You can hear every detail at all times. You get really punchy and beefy low end, but then it's never muddied, and the vocals always continue to stand out, and the dynamics are always preserved, and then the big moments feel huge, which is a really, really difficult thing to do as well as they've done from a production side of things. And then also, you know, as an artist in his 20s, I feel like they sing a lot about how it is to be someone who makes art as a young person, and in like the current age that we are in, and especially like the chorus of Hurt has been my own little anthem this year as an indie musician. But whether you make music or just listen to music, this is a fantastically fun and interesting record, and I've given it so many spins that it easily gets my number 3 slot. My favorite tracks off of this one are Hurt, 81 Tons, and Black and Gold, which is the last song on this record, and he does this like Billie Eilish vocal thing at the end. That's really, really, really cool. So highly recommend giving Fission by Dead Poet Society a listen. And this gets my number 3 top favorite album of 2024. All right. With number 2, I do have this one on vinyl, and that is You Won't Go Before You're Supposed To by Knocked Loose, which, gosh, this album is so insane and so very different from what you will find out is my number 1 album of 2024. But they're kind of both up here for the same reason. So as a little bit of a story on why I love this album, the very first time that I listened to it, I was on an airplane flying from Durango, Colorado, where I live, to Denver, Colorado, which is a short flight, but it's always so insanely bumpy because of like the mountain region between us, I think. It just tends to be really, really turbulent, and you're always in kind of a smaller plane. So this flight was as it tends to be, which is really, really bumpy. And because of that, my usual strategy is that I put on some loud music, and that way I don't have to listen to the airplane creak and groan every time that like we're tossed side to side. So having heard that this album had just come out the day before, I downloaded it to my phone, and I hit play as soon as we took off. And somehow, in a way that I cannot explain, this album like completely calmed me. This conveys like raw emotion in a way of just screaming it right in your fucking face the whole time. And during the first listen of this record, I genuinely found myself tearing up as a result of just the sheer intensity of every track. But I also felt like this album was permission. As a musician with a habit for, I guess, breaking the rules for success within the indie scene, this was like an insane metal album that felt like permission to do just whatever you want with music. Like, they broke so many traditional rules on this, whether it be from how they approach their production strategy to the song length and the pacing. There's all these different things that they did that would be like quote unquote wrong that felt so right and that I loved so much. It was so unapologetic and authentic within this like really just thrashingly heavy metal record. Truly, this is not an album that will be for everyone, but if you can at least withstand some raw screamed vocals for the absolutely adrenaline rush of 30 minutes that is this album, you need to listen to it. There's something within these songs that lets you like release all the frustration and the rage and like the lack of control that's gifted to young people in the 2020s, and it just feels good to experience it in this way. But my personal pathos aside, You Won't Go Before You're Supposed To boasts some of the most epic breakdowns, snare bombs, screamed vocals that I've ever heard. This is not an album that like tries to sell metal to like pop and country listeners. This is not an album that tries to trick you into thinking that it's something else. This will make your lips curl and your heart pump and your head thrash, and you need to listen to it really loud with good speakers and a decent subwoofer, and it kicks you in the chest, and it's so freaking awesome, but it also really contains that emotional depth that I think a really good record has. So this, for me, has hit my number 2 slot. This is an absolutely epic, insane, amazing album. It's so fucking heavy, but I really would highly recommend giving this a listen or 10 if you can stomach the absolute just in your face assault that this album is. My 3 favorite tracks off of this one are Suffocate, which is featuring Poppy. That breakdown is so awesome. Don't Reach For Me, which has there's this like 2-second point where the guitar plays this line before a drop, and it like I can't not make like the stank face every time that happens. And then lastly, The Calm That Keeps You Awake has this crazy like drum opener, and I like lyrically I think is really, really awesome. So those are my top 3 favorite tracks from this album. All right, in my number 1 slot, and sadly I don't have this one on vinyl, but I'm looking for it, so I wish that I was holding it up right now. But in my number 1 spot is Crack a Smile, Come On Stay a While by Abby Holliday. This is her 3rd full-length album, and it just feels like this timeless yet completely original work of art. This album doesn't feel like it's defined by its year of release. You know how there's sometimes records that come out that you're like, yeah, this exists really perfectly within the year that it came out, but 10 years down the road, it's like I can't really relate to this anymore. They rely so much on pop culture and like the immediately present, and I felt like this one would hit me at any point, any year that I'm listening to it. But at the same time, it feels present, which I think finding that duality in a piece of music is really, really difficult to do. And Abby Holliday nails it. Every track feels like it can pull whatever it is that I'm feeling at any given moment, and then she just places it into words. Each of these songs is so completely raw and vulnerable that it breaks my own walls down with every listen. Like when I'm resistant to where the music's trying to poke me, it's kind of like you need the artist to get there first so that you can come along and join them. And Abby Holliday is so vulnerable and authentic in all of these songs feel so vulnerable and authentic that it's so easy for me as a listener to just come in and participate in the track. Even more so, what I feel like is one of the most important things about an album is that it needs to not be a compilation, but an album. There needs to be a through line between all of the songs. And Holliday seamlessly creates a narrative through these 12 tracks, amidst which is not like a single song that I would skip. Every single one of them stands out on its own, but is also an amazing participant in the whole of the album. And this album like grips my heart with every listen, every single time. And the reason that this album takes my number 1 slot is for a few reasons. The first one is that I have easily listened to this album 100 times this year. I just cannot get over the comforting, tear-jerking, and interesting nature of this album that boasts so much depth every single time. And then the second reason is that Holliday has written these songs in a way that they each feel intensely personal. The level of, and I know I've said this word so many times in regards to this, but the level of authenticity that she captures in her songwriting gives me the option to either experience it myself or to empathize with her, with the song, with this other topic that it might be talking about. It's like, even if I haven't experienced it, the ability to go and participate in that feeling is open. The invitation is like right in front of you. And that's really, really special. What's also really great about this album is that nothing on any of these tracks feels unnecessary. You know, nothing feels produced just to get social media features or like a 15-second, like, oh, this is our good section that we can post in a reel or a TikTok or whatever. But everything on here feels very real. It feels like the song needs it and it serves each song. Sonically, this album has an incredible mixture of folk, alt rock, and like, once again, electronic influences that supply these like little moments of ear candy at all the right moments. I mean, there are so many little obsessive details in each of these songs that all flow together perfectly. And because of that, every single time that you listen to it, you're like, oh, I can catch this little thing. Or you're looking forward to that little like 1 second moment of ear candy that she put in here. And it just makes it a really, really exciting album to listen to. And so much so that it's inspired my own production and songwriting. And I find some new detail every time I listen to that. I'm trying to go like, okay, how can I mimic something like that? Because I didn't know I could do that. Which is so exciting as a musician as well, to go like, oh, this person's done something that has said, oh wait, I can do that in my own stuff, which has been yet another reason why this album has stood out so much to me. Despite all of these sonic movements that I've never heard before, none of them feel foreign. And I think that's the other special thing, is sometimes, for instance, in the number 10 slot, Foxing will often do something new that it just feels so foreign. And you have to kind of get your ear used to it, and you appreciate it more and more as you get used to it. In these, she would do something I'd never heard of, but it would still feel almost like familiar. Even if it was like a complete genre twist, it felt safe. I don't even understand how you're able to do that at the like level of expertise that Abby Holliday's done it on this album. Every single thing she does in every single one of these songs serves both the song and the album in such a phenomenal way that it's left such an incredible lasting impact on me this year. In my opinion, this is a perfect album. It accomplishes everything that music should accomplish, and it has a really deep and genuine and real impact on the soul. So long 2024, and thanks for all the fish. This has been a really exciting and jam-packed year for music, and these, like I said, these are just 10 of my personal favorites. I had a list of 30 that I had to narrow down. What I have found in all of these was, I think, the importance of just surrendering myself to the listen, regardless of what others say or even what my ears say in like the first 30 seconds. Participating in the music can inspire and comfort and challenge. And with music at a point that it's more accessible than it's ever been, I count myself grateful that I could listen to all of these projects that seem to find me exactly where I was at different points of this year. So cheers to a really great year of music, and I'm looking forward to much more to come. Speaking of things to come, I have a new EP that will be coming out at the end of January, so please keep an eye out for that. It won't be on streaming platforms because I'm doing some stuff a little bit differently, but if you keep an eye on the channel, or if you keep an eye on the Patreon, which once again, you can be a Patreon member for free. There is no charge for like our basic tier, and you get a lot of great stuff, including the essay that was written about all of this that's on there. So please keep an eye out for that new music and some show announcements as well. And thank you all for all of your support on this channel, on my music, and just on the art that I've made this year. And I hope that you will go out and support some amazing independent artists this next year. And just, gosh, we're so lucky to be able to listen to and to enjoy all of this music. So if you love an artist, like, go to their shows. Buy their t-shirt, support them beyond just the basics of streaming music on Spotify, because well, Spotify doesn't actually pay musicians. And I'd love to hear what your top 10 favorite albums are of this year. So once again, cheers to a great year of music. I look forward for so much more to come, and Happy New Year.